Hey guys, David Tao with BarBend.com, and the CrossFit Games are only weeks, month and a half, no, over 2 months. All right, well, the CrossFit Games were delayed again, so we're going to bring you the update there on the new earliest starting dates. And a lot of top athletes who had said they were out of this year's CrossFit Games after former CEO and outgoing owner Greg Glassman's controversial tweet and statements, well, they're back in after incoming CEO and owner Eric Roza said that CrossFit would be making a lot of internal changes. But first, make sure you subscribe to BarBend on YouTube to stay up to date on all things strength. That's not only CrossFit, but that's weightlifting, powerlifting, strongman, anything related to strength sports, we've got you covered. Just hit that subscribe. All right, first things first. When are the 2020 CrossFit Games? I guess technically, when are the 2020 Reebok CrossFit Games? This is the final year of Reebok's partnership, and no word on if they're restarting negotiations now that CrossFit has a new incoming CEO and owner. But the CrossFit Games, they were originally scheduled to take place in late July, and then they were moved to mid-August. Now, the earliest start date from CrossFit HQ that they have announced and talked to the athletes about is September 14th. As far as we know, that's still just individual competition, no team competition or masters or teens competition at this year's games, and an earliest start date at the ranch in Aromas, California, September 14th. That could also change. There's a lot at stake here and a lot up in the air. With COVID cases rising again in many parts of the United States, travel restrictions are still in place. In fact, the travel restrictions are something that CrossFit cited as a reason for the delays. Could athletes from outside the US or even within the US actually get to California to compete in the games? We don't really know. A lot is up in the air. Again, this year's games are a smaller iteration. We don't have that giant 150 plus individual field like we had last year with all the national champions. So remains to be seen. Will things actually be able to kick off September 14th? As far as we know, CrossFit has yet to get explicit approval from the county to hold the games on those dates. And a lot is going to be dependent on those factors. Travel restrictions. Is there going to be a spike in cases in the county where the CrossFit Games are going to be held in Aromas or the state of California? This is really kind of up to the pandemic, but the earliest we're going to see this year's CrossFit Games, September 14th. It's worth noting the CrossFit Games this year are one of the only strength sports events that are still technically on the 2020 calendar as far as major, big international strength sports events. The 2020 Olympics, well, those will happen in 2021. It's still called Tokyo 2020. That's a little confusing. Most major powerlifting meets have been either canceled or postponed for this year. Strongman, well, the world's strongest man is still scheduled to take place later this year. We don't really have many updates on scheduling changes there. And in the world of weightlifting, like I said, with the Olympics, most major events have been punted to 2021. We may still see some international level competition in late 2020, but it's getting more and more unlikely, I think. Could the CrossFit Games for 2020 just be canceled? Dave Castro and CrossFit HQ have made it clear they want to test the fittest in 2020, and we understand that. That's something I'd personally love to see. But the COVID-19 pandemic continues to change and shift plans for every industry, and this is not an exception. Doing a live in-person competition with all the competitors in the same place isn't the only way to test fitness. I mean, the Rogue Invitational was a really impressive technical lift earlier this summer, and it was a lot of fun to watch, even though the athletes were all at different locations at their home gyms, their garage gyms, their home boxes. It seems like CrossFit HQ and especially Dave Castro are kind of against that. They want to test the fittest in person. There are still a lot of hurdles to jump over to actually make that a reality. A lot of things up in the air, but at least we have some new earliest start dates. Now, after Glassman's controversial Floyd 19 tweet, a lot of other accusations came out against CrossFit HQ. It caused a firestorm, let's put it that way. Even after Glassman stepped down and made Dave Castro interim CEO, folks complained that he was just going to kind of be a puppet master behind the scenes. Is there really going to be any real change if the same person owns CrossFit HQ? July 2020, we're here. We have a new incoming CEO and owner, Eric Roza. It seems like there are already some changes in process. CrossFit announced they were undergoing a cultural review. They've also announced a new scholarship program. Director of Training, Nicole Carroll, who had resigned in the wake of the Glassman Twitter scandal, has said she's coming back to CrossFit. Now, Nicole Carroll is the longtime co-director of training with Dave Castro, so Nicole Carroll's back at CrossFit. And that begs the question, do a lot of the athletes who said they were out of this year's games until issues were addressed at CrossFit HQ come back to this year's games? The answer is some have already started to do so. It turns out that shortly after they announced the new earliest start dates for this year's CrossFit Games, again, September 14th, CrossFit had also given athletes a target date basically at the end of June to say if they were in or out of this year's games. Dave Castro had even said in an interview that if an athlete had said they were out of this year's games, they would have the chance to recommit to compete in this year's games following the announcement of Eric Roza's acquisition of CrossFit HQ. Some athletes have already stated publicly they are back in. Now, before I name specific names, I want to point out, just because an athlete announced they were out and hasn't announced if they're back in or not, does not necessarily mean they're in or they're out. Just because they haven't posted on social media, we don't know what their internal or personal decisions were. So this is kind of a list as of now, Wednesday, July 1st. There could be a lot of changes to this. We're just trying to keep you up to date. So a lot of the athletes I'll talk about, they may make a different decision. Folks who haven't announced whether they're back in or still out, we don't know the full rundown on all of them. Just keep that in mind when you're making mean comments right underneath here. First off, Games veteran Chandler Smith and last year's second fittest man on earth, Noah Olson, had been some of the first athletes to say they were out of this year's games unless significant changes were made. It seems like they think significant changes have been made, or at least we're on the right track. Chandler Smith and Noah Olson are both back in for the 2020 CrossFit Games. Here's what Chandler had to say. We decided to sit out because we hope that we could help trigger a positive cultural change within in a brand we all love dearly. The combined efforts of athletes, affiliates, brands, and employees contributed to CrossFit committing to a serious values change through the pending sale to Eric Roza. At this point, I think there's a new best way to continue to be part of positive change. So with that in mind, I'm back, #Games 2020. And here's what Noah Olson had to say. From the beginning, I said that if there was a change worth celebrating, the best place to do so would be at the CrossFit Games. While it may not be party time just yet, I am feeling optimistic about the outlook for our dearly beloved sport and community. Thus far, Eric Roza has said a lot of the right things, and I feel a responsibility to step back in and play a role in trying to bring some of those words to life. As CrossFit continues to introduce programs that foster diversity and inclusion, CrossFit Games, here we come, #committed to CrossFit. That hashtag, by the way, is something that new CEO and owner Eric Roza has been using frequently in CrossFit, and it seems to have been adopted pretty quickly across a lot of different parts of the CrossFit community. Tim Paulson, another multi-time CrossFit Games athlete who had decommitted from the games, also says he's back in, and he also had some words regarding the new look and feel of this year's, unique games format. Here's what Tim had to say. Today, I confirmed that I'll be competing at my 4th CrossFit Games later this summer, maybe fall. In the last 2 weeks, CrossFit has taken some incredible steps to initiate real dynamic change, and I am optimistic about the future for the community and the sport. The new leadership seems to genuinely care for every facet of what CrossFit has come to represent and encompass, is having the hard conversations and listening to the stakeholders, and that's great to see. We won't be high-fiving a crowd at the games, or anybody, most likely, and it's going to be a unique mental test that I'm looking forward to tackling. The big training prep block starts Monday. There are still a lot of big-name athletes whose status for this year's games we don't know. Katrin Davidsdottir, the 2015 and 2016 Games champ, who was one of the first to come out against Greg Glassman's statements and one of the first to decommit from this year's games. Brooke Wells, the American multi-time Games competitor. Sam Briggs, the 2013 Games champion, who had also said she's out of this year's games. Brent Fikowski, podium finisher out of Canada. Dani Spiegel, the American Games competitor who made her debut in 2019, hasn't publicly stated whether she's in for this year's games after she had decommitted in that same group as Davidsdottir, Amanda Barnhart, and Brooke Wells. Now, there are more. There were nearly 20 Games athletes who had stated they were out of this year's games. And again, this story is rapidly changing. The point of this video is to bring you an update on the dates for this year's CrossFit Games. There's still tentative dates, and an update on some big name athletes who had said they were definitely out and have now said they're definitely back in. High among them, Chandler Smith, Noah Olson, and Tim Paulson. I'm sure we'll see some to follow. For BarBend.com, I'm David Thomas Tao. Thanks for tuning in.